Hey guys, Andy here from Suite Additions. Welcome to our new duplex conversion project. So one of the questions I get asked most often is, what do I look for in a property that I want to duplex? So I'm going to outline these items by showing you a brand new house that we recently just purchased. We're going to do a tour of the property, and we'll start by outlining 8 important rules that you need to follow in order to comply with the city bylaws and building codes. These are all borrowed from our handy 8-point checklist that you can download for free on our website at www.suiteadditions.com. And then the big thing really is ceiling height, right? This is a pretty decent ceiling. I mean, we have about probably, I'm gonna say 7 feet to 3 inches here, okay? So for old houses, which this of course is, probably built in the 1930s, you are required to have a finished ceiling height of 6 feet 5 inches. Okay, in a newer house, like if you were to build a brand new house and put in a purpose-built second suite, you would be required to have 6 feet 11 inches. So we have 6 feet 5 here for sure. It's not going to be a problem. So this is one of the things that you want to look at right away is when you go into that basement, can I duplex it? Can I put in the second suite? Check for the height. Because if you don't have the height, then you might have to actually dig down, underpin, and that might not make your project profitable. Okay, and then usually when I talk about the height, the first question that comes up after that is, what about ducts and beams, right? So this duct here is definitely substantially lower than 6 feet 5 inches, so is this beam, okay? So in these situations, what we may need to do is increase the height of the duct, maybe reduce it to a pancake type duct that is maybe 4 inches in thickness. Or we may be able to shift some of these ducts to the perimeter walls where it's not going to affect the height as somebody's trying to move back and forth here, okay? The other thing is beams as well. So you can see this built-up wood beam here. It is lower than the 6 feet 5 inches. So there's really a couple of strategies that we can use here. Sometimes, if we're not able to get the height that we need here, we'll build a wall, right? So that's exactly what we're going to do for this basement. We're going to build a wall along the path of this beam so that really it's only going to be the doors that are going to be going through into the bedrooms. And in some cases, we actually have to replace a portion of the beam, right? Sometimes a portion, sometimes the whole thing. And a lot of times we're able to insert it right into the joist cavity, and then the joists are attached to the beams with joist hangers, okay? When it comes to ceiling height in basements, every inch counts, so this is something you want to pay attention to right away, because if you don't have it, the city may not allow you to actually put in the second unit, okay? So that kind of covers ceiling height, and really when it comes to the building code, the last thing I want to discuss is the actual room sizes. So you're required to have minimum room size requirements for living rooms, kitchens, and bedrooms, dining rooms, things like that. So just make sure that each individual room that you have enough space for it. Now, if you combine certain rooms, like let's say you combine the kitchen, living room, and dining room together, the actual total square footage can be reduced as opposed to having individual rooms, right? So know what the rules are. Again, if you download my guide, we have a link to the provincial guidelines that will actually outline all of those things so you'll know what to look for. Sometimes, if you go to the city's website, they might have, like a 2 or 3 page cheat sheet that outlines their interpretation of it, right? So when it comes to the building code, it should be the same for every municipality in Ontario, but sometimes the city's interpretation may be a little bit different. So make sure you know the rules for your particular city that you're working with, all right? So that's it when it comes to the 4 items related to the building code. And what we're gonna do right now is we're going to talk about some of those other additional items. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the electrical systems. We've talked about this in one of our past videos, but this is going to be very important, right? You have a new unit. You're going to be introducing a lot more load requirements when it comes to electrical usage. You have potentially an additional electric stove, electric dryer, and all the individual rooms and spaces that you have. So just make sure that you have adequate electrical supply. I always recommend most houses are going to have 100 amp service, but if you're able to upgrade it to 200 amp service, that would more than cover what you need for a duplex conversion. Make sure you have a licensed electrician check this for you, check the loads, make sure everything's okay. and consider getting this replaced. So what we're doing for this property actually is that we are going to be increasing the service size from 100 amps to 200 amps. We're going to have 2 separate meters, right? And we're also going to have 2 separate panels, one that is accessible to each occupant, just so that if somebody trips a breaker because, you know, something happened, they ran the toaster and the microwave at the same time, they don't have to go knocking on the door of their neighbor in order to reset the breaker, right? And just 2 separate meters from an administrative side, it's just going to be a lot easier. You know, they're going to be paying exactly for their usage, so they're going to be more responsible for their consumption of energy. And it's just administratively, it's going to be a lot easier. So that covers the electrical component. So this is something that is very important to consider. Obviously, everything done in the basement has to meet today's electrical codes, right? So you have to have tamper-resistant outlets. They have to be arc fault protected. In areas where they're exposed to water, like kitchens and bathrooms, you need to have ground fault protection. So all that sort of stuff, your licensed electrician will be able to handle that. The electrical component is different from everything else in that the city's not going to inspect it. It will be under the ESA, which is the Electrical Safety Authority. And sometimes the city will just ask you to provide a document from the Electrical Safety Authority that everything is done properly, right? So arrange that with your electrician and make sure you do everything properly. You know, your contractor or a handyman cannot do the electrical work. You need a licensed electrical contractor here in Ontario, okay? So the next item we're going to talk about is plumbing, right? So this is something that a lot of people don't consider. With so many additional fixtures and faucets, you know, you have an extra bathroom with a vanity, a toilet, and a tub or shower. You have your kitchen, so you have kitchen sink, you have a dishwasher, you have potentially another laundry unit in most cases, right? So you're introducing another 6, 7, 8 additional fixtures. So your service size is going to be very important. What I've been telling people is, you know, get a 1-inch service line coming in. It could be a copper, it could be a plastic service line, because that will provision for a future garden suite, right? A lot of people are considering that right now is putting in a garden suite. So if you're gonna have to do it anyways, you might as well go 1 inch. If it's an existing 3/4 inch, you might be okay. But you know, if it's a 1/2 inch pipe or a galvanized steel pipe or a lead pipe, then you're not going to have adequate water supply for your house. Now you notice there's 1 meter here. And what we're going to do is we're going to install a sub-meter. And the city won't allow you to have 2 separate lines coming in, one for, you know, each tenant, but they will allow you to have a sub-meter. As a matter of fact, the way we're going to do this is we're going to have this main meter here, and then we're going to branch it out to having 2 sub-meters. And those 2 sub-meters are going to be feeding each unit. So one is going to be in the basement, one is going to be on the upper level, and we're going to attach a wireless monitor that will detect the amount of water consumption per unit. And that's all done wirelessly. It's actually connected to their Wi-Fi system. And that's pretty cool, because then we can just determine you know, how much water they used exactly. So there's no, you know, bickering between the tenants to say who used more water. I mean, that's the same thing with electrical, right? They're responsible directly for the consumption that they're going to be using. And you know, we're going to get the bill from the municipality, and we're just going to bill it back to the renter. So we covered electrical, we covered plumbing, and the next thing we're going to talk about is the HVAC system. So the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So that's also a very important aspect of the second suite conversion. So I'm going to show you guys the heating system. So here we have a high efficiency condensing furnace, and this was designed for the entire house, right? So the main floor and the basement. So whenever we add a second suite or duplex a property, as long as we're not adding in additional floor space, like we're not putting a, you know, a second story on, or we're adding in floor space with a rear addition, you know, the furnace itself is going to be adequate from a capacity standpoint, right? So from an output standpoint, it's going to be adequate. However, because we're going to be adding in additional rooms, we're going to be, you know, compartmentalizing the space. It's hard to say that word. You know, we are going to ensure that we have supply registers for each space, right? And then also returns so that this air can get cycled back in. So, you know, in most cases, you don't have to redesign or do heating and ventilation calculations, but you do need to ensure that your spaces has adequate heating. So, this is a forced air system. Some people use boiler systems, some people use electric systems. Whatever the system that you're using for heating, you just need to make sure that you have adequate heating for every space in the basement, okay? So that's from a capacity standpoint. And then obviously, we have all this duct work here, right? We have the supply ducts here. We have the return air ducts. There's a lot of ducts here, right? Again, I'm a short guy and this is like only a couple inches away. So we're gonna have to figure out how to deal with this. Some of this might get shifted in a different spot. Some of it we might actually reduce. Or, sometimes we can just redesign the space so that this does not become an obstruction. Maybe this is actually going to be part of the furnace room, where, nobody's going to be using the space anyways. Or we might actually move this somewhere else. So, these are expenses that a lot of people don't think about, but you have to consider when you're adding, additional space, where is everything positioned? Sometimes, and we've made this mistake before, is that we had the duct right underneath the bathtub and, people aren't able to take a proper shower, right? And then we have to kind of redesign it. So, these are things that you're going to work with your designer on, or if you're designing the space, just make sure to take these things into account. Oh, the other thing is air conditioning. If your basement space is very well insulated, not only is it going to be warm in the winter, it's going to be very cool in the summer as well. And what that means is that, the air conditioning space, the air conditioning that you need for this space is going to be very minimal, right? So a lot of times the air conditioning really is only benefiting the upper levels. The basement doesn't necessarily need it. So as a matter of fact, in some cases, you might even have to close out some of the supply registers in the summertime because the air conditioning is making the space colder, okay? So that's one thing to consider as well. Okay, so that covers heating and cooling. And the last thing we're gonna talk about is having a dry basement space, right? The vast majority of second suites that we do here in Ontario are going to be in basements, and basements are notorious for leaking, especially in an old house like this. This house is built in the 1930s. You can actually see evidence of water damage, right? So you can see stains here. You can see that white flaky stuff. That's called efflorescence. That's basically the salts that are in the concrete. Basically makes its way to the surface as moisture is wicking through, right? So concrete is not impermeable. It is porous and there's moisture that can come through. Now, I've talked about this before, is to make sure that everything is dealt with on the outside properly. So making sure we have our gutters and downspouts doing its job, make sure we have the grading so that water is draining away. But this house, it is really old, and there's probably a limited amount of stuff that we can do because there are limitations on the outside. So we're gonna fix everything on the outside, but most likely we're gonna have to waterproof this basement as well. And we are gonna do an interior waterproofing system where we have a ditch system here where we're gonna have a weeping tile. Any moisture that gets wicked through is gonna go into that weeping tile and get redirected into a sump pump at the rear of the house and then get pumped into the backyard, right? And that just gives us a little bit more peace of mind. I think that it is worth it. We're gonna be spending, over $100,000 on this basement. For an extra few $1,000s, we wanna make sure that our investment is going to, last for the long term. I mean, the last thing we want is to spend $100,000 on this basement and then, having to rip out a big chunk of it because there's water damage behind there that can cause, water damage, of course, and then also mold, which is a health concern for anyone living here, right? So we want to make it a nice dry space. All right, so that covers everything, guys. Thanks so much for watching this. We're going to keep you updated on the progress of this project, and yeah, I think it's going to be a big transformation. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more about investing in housing densification and how you can get involved, hit that subscribe button. I put together a beginner's guide and also a handy 8-point checklist that covers everything you need to know about adding a legal second suite. We cover important bylaw and building code requirements for cities in Ontario and all the design considerations you need to make to successfully complete your project. You can download that through the link in the description below. Until next time, to your success.